So let's say you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
All right, welcome to the debate, everyone. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. We have Maya Adkison up here as moderator, and we are joined by Unidentified Leviathan, or Liam, as he has asked to be known, because Unidentified Leviathan is a lot of syllables. So the debate topic is, does the fossil record provide evidence for evolution? The format today is going to be 10-minute opening statements, 8-minute rebuttals, a 30-minute open discussion period, and a 30-minute Q&A period. If you have questions, get them in the chat, and Maya will be writing that down. And she'll be asking during the Q&A period. The person to whom the question is asked will get 2 minutes to answer, and then the other person will get 1 minute to give a response if they want to. Any time ceded from openers or rebuttals can be added to the open discussion and the Q&A. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maya, who is our moderator and timekeeper, and she will let me know when she's ready for me to go with my opening.
Okay, are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay, please start.
All right, so the debate topic here is very important. It's, does the fossil record provide evidence? So we have to really start with defining what we mean by evidence. Evidence is anything which will indicate one possibility over other competing possibilities. So, for instance, almost any explanation for how fossils got there could accommodate the fossils if we're willing to simply make up as many ad hoc rationalizations as we want. So, for example, you can say, well, all the fossils got there because of the flood. Well, how come, we don't find fossils of, say, modern crabs down with trilobites? Like, oh, well, trilobites are more dense, or you can just come up with a million different things. But one of the ways that science can use to differentiate between these ad hoc rationalizations and actual evidence is predictions. So if a hypothesis makes a prediction that would not be made if the hypothesis weren't true, and that prediction is verified, then that is good evidence that the hypothesis is true. And if that happens enough times, then science is much more confident in saying, hey, that this is probably something that's true. So one of the things is that a lot of times creationism makes quote-unquote predictions, but they aren't different from the predictions that evolutionary theory would make. So for instance, if a creationist says, well, I predict that we're going to find birds only in upper strata because of, and then they give their reasons like hydrologic sorting or something.
Silent.
I went silent? Pause time if I'm silent. Can people hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Maya, can you hear me? Oh, I think we had a Maya problem. All right. Maya? Uh-oh.
Mayasaurus?
Not sure what to do with that. Our moderator's gone. Let's see if she's there. Maya, you froze typing in chat. Okay, Maya's reconnecting. All right, so hopefully that won't be too big of a problem. Sorry for technical difficulties, everyone. Maya's reconnecting, and then I will block her video once again. Give her a little bit. Oh, keep going? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and assume that I'm at 2 minutes. Does that seem right, Unidentified?
Yeah, I'd say.
Okay, so these predictions that creationism makes that aren't at odds with alternate explanations aren't really predictions. Instead, they're simply observations that have already been made. But on the other hand, evolution has a history of making predictions about what will be found in the fossil record and then having such things turn up. So, for instance, evolution predicted, say, that most land animals would have evolved from ocean animals, and that we should see transitional forms between them. And so we, in fact, have transitional forms like Eusthenopteron, which is still very aquatic, but seems to have some of the limb girdle structure that later amphibians and amniotes would use on land. We also have uh, things like Tiktaalik, which is even more adapted for terrestrial life, and in ways that are compatible with predictions about the morphology of such a creature based on things like embryonic development and things like that. Oh, Maya is back. Welcome back, Maya. I'm going to make sure that you are locked. Spotlight video. All right, so we should be good there. All right, so other examples, basically any transitional form that's been found between um, primitive forms and more advanced forms is a prediction of evolution. And sure, creationism can account for it, it can adapt to it, but it didn't predict it. So, for example, Archaeopteryx or uh, Pro Procyon, sorry, that was it, or anything in the transition to mammals from more primitive synapsids, with the jaw bones moving up into the ear and the lumbar vertebrae disappearing, creating the distinction between thoracic and lumbar vertebrae. But there's also just the fact that most creationist accounts of the biostratigraphy of the fossil record don't actually work. For instance, hydrologic sorting doesn't actually explain why things like bivalve mollusks can be found almost from the lowest layers all the way up to the top, even though, according to hydrological sorting, they should all sink down. Things like environment sorting, where animals are buried based on what environment they live in, don't make sense because we have evidences of things like deserts, underneath oceans, underneath forests in the fossil record. This succession of paleo environments doesn't actually correspond to anything like environmental sorting in a worldwide flood. So, in addition to having positive evidence for evolution in the fossil record, we also have negative evidence against one of the main competing hypotheses. I'm not trying to set up a false dichotomy. I'm just saying that many of the things that are used to counter and saying, oh, this isn't evidence for evolution, actually don't work. And so we have that. Now, it's true, there are certain lineages for which we have a paucity of transitional forms. For instance, most apes, humans are actually a bit of an exception, but most apes have very poor fossil records. We essentially have two pongids, which is the family of, or not the family, but the subfamily, I guess, for orangutans. We have like two species there. We have one proto-gorilla. We have one ape that is extremely primitive that existed across large swaths of Europe. But other than that, the ape fossil record outside of the human line is extremely poor. But evolution doesn't necessarily predict that we should find transitions for every single evolutionary process that happened across the planet in every line, because some things don't preserve well. The prediction is simply that we will find them, and the fact is that creation never predicted them, and there's no reason to expect them. It can simply accommodate them. And I think that's it for me. I'm going to cede any of my remaining time to the QA and discussion.
Okay, and that puts you at about 5 minutes and 55 seconds.
That's okay by me. Let's just add 2 minutes to each of the other sections.
Okay. All right. And Liam, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Ready when you
Well, yeah. It's come. Yeah. Yes. Sorry, I'm just kind of
take
off
your time.
guard. Okay. I got really nothing to say now because.
Well, whatever you were normally going to give for your opening, you can still give, because remember, openings don't have to be a rebuttal of what I was going to say.
Okay. Just sorry it's taking me so long.
It's all right. Get your notes together. Get your thoughts together. By the way, guys, I know some people may have joined a little bit later on. We're going to be saving up questions for the end, so feel free to ask them, and hopefully Maya can get as many of them down as possible. If she seems like
what?
she's missed yours, just write it in again. Is my mic not going well?
I hear you.
Nestle20 said there might have been a mic problem, but I'm not sure. Oh no, Liam is not having a mic problem. Liam
Oh,
is
no,
collecting
getting his notes
his.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of something to start off the sort of opening, but
Well, maybe
without trying to attack your position.
feel free. Look, if it's going to be easier for you to attack the position, then go for it. Like I said, I'm not a stickler there.
Evolution does not really hold that much. When you say that, when it makes when you find these transitional fossils, you would say you could make the idea or prediction that they evolved from something there. But there are other theories of what that is. Like evolution is not the evolution is one to have.
Oh, you just went away from your mic, I think, Liam. Can you come a little bit back?
Sorry.
And Mike, can we pause that time while he's getting back to his mic?
Absolutely.
Sorry. It's just you kind of, I don't know if there was a change or something, but.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me well?
Yep, you're back. Okay.
Okay, so yeah,
You had just said that there were other hypotheses or theories that could explain transitional fossils.
yeah, and how the fossil got there and how basically how it died. And, yeah. Well, not really. No. Yeah, so with say Tiktaalik could have been just a amphibian, which it's okay to have diversity in amphibian. Yeah, so yeah, sorry, it's taking so long. Just
That's all right.
trying to think.
Your clock is running.
Yeah. I really have nothing to say.
Well, if you'd like, you can see the time to the open discussion and the Q&A.
Yeah, can you do that?
Okay.
Absolutely. You're at 1 minute and 25 seconds.
All right. So let's just add 4 minutes to each, you think?
Absolutely.
Okay. So in rebuttal, I guess I will continue on. So it is true that creationism can account for things like transitional forms. It can simply say, well, that's something that was made. And it's true. That is a reasonable accommodation. But the difference is that when you have competing hypotheses, either of which can accommodate a certain data set, the one that predicted the existence of the data set is to be preferred, especially if it can go on to continue to make predictions. So, for example, before Archaeopteryx was found, and around the time that Darwin and Wallace were proposing the idea of evolution by natural selection, people had already noticed that the hind leg morphology of birds was very similar to the newly discovered dinosaurs. And so, if evolution were true, then we might expect to see some kind of transition between more primitive dinosaur anatomy and bird anatomy. And only a few years later, after that prediction was made, Archaeopteryx was found, which verified that prediction. But the thing is, the only people predicting that such an organism would be found were those proposing evolution, because it fit with the idea of evolution. It was a prediction. If it's true, this is what we should find. Similarly with Tiktaalik, sure, it can be accommodated by creationism, but its discovery was made by Neil Shubin, who actually wanted to discover a transitional form between aquatic fish-grade organisms and more terrestrial tetrapod organisms. And so he looked at a geographical or geological map of Canada, found the strata that he thought would be the right strata for the time range that he was looking at, and then went to the site. It took him a while because it's a very harsh conditions up there, because it's in far northern Canada where it's only really livable for a couple months a year. But still, he found the fossil at the predicted location and the predicted level of the strata. Creationism simply has no ability to do this. To my knowledge, no creationist has simply said, okay, I predict we will find this particular fossil in these layers, even though no one has found it yet, and then been able to go do it. Or even that any fossil form that hasn't been found simply will be. And so that is why the fossil record, I would say, actually provides evidence for evolution, even though everything that has been found in there can be accommodated by other explanations. And that's my rebuttal.
Okay.
Well,
Go ahead.
well, it doesn't really prove anything because you need probably over 100 or 1,000 specimens of one species to probably prove it, considering that, if that's how it works. And you probably wouldn't even have any fossils if it was working through PE. So, yeah, simply making the prediction of it doesn't really prove it. It kind of just proves that you made a prediction. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
Is that your rebuttal? Because we can just move on to open discussion if you'd like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Mike, can you note down how much time we're going to add to each of the other 2 segments?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So for the rebuttal round, it should have been 8 minutes. You had 2.5. You had 1 minute.
Okay. Why is my... So, let us know when we're ready to start.
And you may begin.
Okay. I just figure I'll take the reins for a second, just because you just finished your rebuttal on it, or Liam. So,
Yep.
It's true that any given prediction does not prove a hypothesis, but one of the things is that science isn't in the business of proving things in a mathematical sense. Science is in the business of eliminating the possibilities that aren't supported and holding on to the possibilities that are supported. So one of the reasons that this prediction is a good way to tell if something is supported and has evidence is because, let's say that we found, let's say for some reason we were in a living room together and there were muddy tracks from a horse.
Okay.
That's a very unusual circumstance. That's not a normal thing to be in a living room, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's say we both have a competing hypothesis. You say that a horse walked in and ate the hay that we also found. And I say, okay, I disagree. I think it was actually an invisible unicorn that did it. Okay. Well, how do we tell who's right?
Well, you do whatever seems logical.
Well, I would say let's wait and see what happens. And if it is a normal horse, then we'll see a normal horse come in and leave additional tracks. But if it's an invisible unicorn, we won't see a horse come in, but we will see additional tracks. Now, let's just say that the invisible unicorn prediction was correct. You could come back and say, okay, but what if it was an invisible llama wearing horseshoes? And I can say, well, maybe, and we can make predictions there. But by having my invisible unicorn prediction have be verified, that's evidence in favor of my position, even if it's not proof of my position. And so the thing is that evolution keeps making accurate predictions. And my question is, why doesn't creationism, and why is that not evidence? Because this debate is supposed to be about evidence, not proof. So those are the two questions that I would ask. Oh, what the? Did Zoom go away? Hold on. I think somehow the meeting just went away. Why is this happening? Sorry, everyone. I have to figure this out. Give me a second. Technical difficulties. Sorry, I must have hit something. Or someone hit something. I don't know. All right, so new links have gone out. I'm not exactly sure what just happened there. Sorry about that. I don't know if that was me or if that was what do you call it? The OBS or Zoom or whatever. But sorry about that, everyone. I really don't know what just happened there.
Yeah, I don't know either. I guess we're not touching anything.
I mean, I sent Unidentified Leviathan a link to this second call. Hopefully
Hmm.
he gets that.
Oh, he was kicked out too.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know.
Wow.
Sorry about that. That's really weird to me, but yeah, it
Well,
ended.
Okay, just a
Leviathan said
second.
it ended. Can you type to Leviathan to check his email? There's another link.
yeah, I'm here.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I don't know what just happened there. I'm really sorry about that. That was not my intention for what's going to happen here. So what was the last thing you heard on Liam?
You were talking about unicorns.
Yes, I
Where's
was. I
Dragon?
was being intentionally a little bit silly there, but that's okay. So my question basically is, so if in the circumstances like that, we can see why predictions are evidence, even if not proof, why can't creationism seem to make the same kind of verifiable predictions that evolution can, in that they're predictions that if this idea weren't true, we wouldn't expect to be true, but that we find to be true? Because every prediction I've ever heard from a creationist has been a prediction that is either actually a post-diction, which is saying, oh, we already know about this, but I'm going to say it's a prediction anyway, or it's been unfalsifiable, like, oh, you'll find out when you're dead. Well, okay, that's great, but until dead people start coming back to tell me what they found out, doesn't really help now. Or it's been trivial, like I predict dogs will produce dogs, and that's not even just trivial, it's also a prediction of evolution. Why doesn't creationism make novel predictions?
Well, that's a very good question. And I gotta say, because, well, the Bible doesn't predict any.
Well, right. I mean, I'm not expecting. So the Bible has a number of genres. There's history. There's poetry. There's. I would say some of the genres are in fact in the ancient Middle Eastern mythological genre, which is not quite history, but it's also not quite fiction either. It's an interesting genre in itself, but that's not what I'm here for. But I agree that none of the Bible is a geology book. I mean, why would it be? It's not what it's about. I wouldn't want to read a whole account of the geological history of ancient Israel. That would be pretty boring. That's not what any of the people reading it want either. But if the ideas behind creationism, such as a worldwide flood, the special creation of a certain set of organisms that may have diversified later, depending on exactly what we're predicting based on creationism, if these things are true, then we should be able to make predictions that would not be made by people who don't think these are true and that are then verified. But I've never seen that actually happen. Do creationists just not have enough confidence in their idea to actually make a novel prediction?
Well, are you done?
Yeah.
Like, are you talking about, like, animal predictions? Like, there's
Really,
going to be
any.
a Dimetrodon in
I mean,
a host
obviously, the debate is about the fossil record, and so I would prefer a fossil prediction, like, if creationism is true, we would expect to see this in the fossil record, and then have that prediction be other than what, say, evolution would predict. But I would honestly, at this point, take any prediction from creationism that has actually turned out to be true, and that is at odds with what competing ideas would say.
Well, in terms of animal predictions or creature predictions, it has not. But in terms of other predictions, like, well, ants, well, the majority of ants being female, which we know now, that would be a prediction.
That's interesting. Could you tell me more about this? Because I'm not familiar with this claim.
So during I don't remember what chapter, or I don't even remember what book it's from, but I know it's in there because I remember hearing it from there. He said, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard, and hear her ways."
I believe that's
kind
from Ecclesiastes.
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
So it's kind of odd how you would call it a girl, considering that at the time you'd probably believe, if how people weren't really that smart back then, you'd probably say, oh, they live in, like, communities instead of colonies, like male and females, like humans.
Right.
So it would kind of be weird how saying for she is like you'd say he in that time. It's kind of, well, it's actually very weird saying that in that time.
So
Actually, real quick, guys,
go
the
ahead.
chat is saying that there's something like jostling or rustling, and it's interfering with the sound.
Oh, do you have anything near your mic, Liam?
Oh, sorry. Not anymore.
Okay. So, Liam, how familiar are you with Semitic languages?
Not very.
Okay. So I am now checking. I just checked Hebrew and Arabic, and both of them have cognate words for ant, which are feminine. So both languages simply use feminine pronouns for all ants, regardless of sex. I'm not sure if that actually counts as a prediction, because that's also true of other animals that are not predominantly female. So I'm not sure that the Bible written in a language in which the word ant is typically feminine is itself a prediction that ants are predominantly female.
Hmm.
So I would say that it's an interesting claim, but the fact that the linguistics don't seem to line up there, because so Semitic languages have two genders for nouns. Nouns can be masculine or feminine, and in both Arabic and Hebrew, the feminine ending is a ah sound, ah, which following a vowel gets hardened to a t sound. It also happens following enclitic pronouns, or preceding enclitic pronouns. Sorry. So that to me just seems like a fairly standard way to write about this particular topic in Hebrew is to use feminine pronouns, because pronouns have to agree in gender with their antecedents. So are there any other predictions that creationism has made that are novel? And I agree that would have been a good one if it had been a little bit more actually the Bible saying all the ants are female rather than simply referring to them with feminine plural pronouns.
Well, I did have a list somewhere around here,
Okay.
but I don't have it on me
Well,
at the moment. So
does it trouble you that there's this disparity between the predictive ability of evolution and the predictive ability of, say, biblical creationism?
what?
Does it bother you to any degree that there is this apparent disparity in the predictive ability of evolutionary biology on the one hand and biblical creationism on the other hand?
A little bit.
Okay. And so I would say that it seems hard to deny that the fossil record provides evidence, even if it doesn't provide proof. So, where is the argument that there is no evidence for evolution in the fossil record? Is it simply that creationism can accommodate these findings?
I'm sorry. Couldn't
No,
really
it's all right.
hear you.
Hey, we're throwing a lot at you. It's all right. And I'm going to go ahead and guess that this is probably your first live debate.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay.
Oh,
Go ahead.
no. You go ahead.
Well, I guess another way to say this question would be in science, one of the things that counts as evidence, as I've said, is a prediction. Now, I'm actually prepared to say that there's a prediction from more general creationism that I think we can reasonably say has come true. And that is actually, I think that the prediction that the universe had a beginning is actually something that a lot of creationists made as a prediction, and not very many, I guess I could say, anti-creationists had made. In fact, before the discovery of the cosmic redshift and the microwave background radiation that was predicted on the basis of the Big Bang and things like this, a lot of cosmologists thought that the universe was essentially in a steady state. It wasn't really expanding, or if it was, new galaxies would pop in to keep the average density of galaxies about the same. And in fact, one famous astronomer, Fred Hoyle, famously called the Big Bang Theory as a dismissal tactic and said, oh, people only believe in that because it's so ingrained in them to believe in the first chapter of Genesis. And so, like I said, I'm willing to say that, yeah, there have been times when there have been predictions made on the sort of more general creationist camp. But in terms of evolution or the fossil record, I just haven't found any of these. Where are there any predictions that have been verified?
Well, I don't really know.
Okay. So, what do you think is the positive evidence for creationism in the fossil record?
Well,
Is none forthcoming?
none is forthcoming.
Okay. So then I guess my question then is, well, then doesn't the fossil record provide evidence for evolution?
Well, no, you're just going off by prediction, which doesn't. You're just predicting. It's
Right, but the predictions are being verified.
full.
How is it that evolution can keep making verifiable predictions that are verified and falsifiable predictions that fail to be falsified and still have that not count as evidence? What would count as evidence if that wouldn't?
I couldn't really hear you. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So what I said was, so evolution can make falsifiable and verifiable predictions that can be both falsified and verified. And
Mm-hmm.
these predictions are consistently verified. Why is that not evidence? Or not, sorry, I had already had a question. If that is not evidence, what would constitute evidence for evolution? Is there anything that you can conceive of that would be evidence for evolution?
Well, I actually was not really prepared for this. I was, by the actual topic, I was thinking of talking about just the fossils and stuff. But
Well, even sticking to there, inside the fossil record, evolution makes predictions that it's hard to falsify a lot of them. Like, oh, it's hard to say that this animal doesn't exist. Okay, I'll grant you that. But they're easy to verify, and it keeps consistently having these predictions verified in the fossil record. Why is that not evidence, and what would evidence be if that isn't evidence?
because just simply a prediction.
It's
Who
not
was the guy who
simply a
went off?
prediction, it's a verified prediction. There's a difference there. I can predict anything. Just off the wall stuff, I can predict it. But if it comes true, that's a different thing.
Yeah, who was the one guy who went looking for Tiktaalik?
Neil Shubin, which, by the way, he
Yeah.
wrote an excellent book called Finding Your Inner Fish. I would highly recommend it to everyone. Go in the chat, go find Neil Shubin's book.
Well, sorry.
Okay, well, let's say evolution
Yeah.
were true. What would be different that you would expect to see that you don't see now?
Well, I would not see. I'm trying to think of something, but
Okay. Because to me, the fossil record seems very closely in line with predictions and expectations of evolution as true, and very much not in line with any competing hypothesis that I'm aware of.
well, yeah. But I did want to stay on Tiktaalik.
Okay, let's go there.
Yeah.
So why is that not evidence?
He went looking for transitional fossils.
Right.
He just went looking for them.
Right.
Like, it could very well not be a transitional fossil because, well, it could be just an amphibian.
Well, what is a transitional fossil according to you?
Well, a transitional fossil is something that is evolving into another through PE or gradualism, which I wanted to be mainly talking about.
Well, I'm going to try and give my definition for a transitional fossil. And for me, a transitional fossil is a fossil that shows morphological intermediacy between a what evolution would consider a relatively basal or primitive form, and another form that we know about that has much more derived characteristics. So, for instance, the reason Tiktaalik is transitional is because it is morphologically intermediate between sarcopterygian fish that were around and fully aquatic versus, say, tetrapods. It had an intermediate morphology, and therefore it is an intermediate, an intermediate fossil, So, and it's transitional because it shows morphology that can be seen as in transition. Whether or not it is actually the ancestor of later tetrapod diversity is less important than the actual physical characters being intermediate between the two forms. Does that seem like a reasonable definition for transitional fossil?
Yes.
So then, by that definition, Tiktaalik is transitional, even if it's not the ancestor of all later tetrapods, which, like I said, it's probably not. Because one of the things that's tough about the fossil record is you can never tell, in essentially any case, whether the fossil you find represents a species that left descendants that are still around. It might have, but given how many species there most likely were in the past versus how few we find fossils for, it probably wasn't the one species that is in fact the ancestor. Like, we're probably never going to find the ancestor of all the tetrapods. Tiktaalik is probably a related species. So why that seems to me like a really good piece of evidence in favor of evolution. Some guy said if evolution is true, and he looked at things like fossil records, genetic diversity of extant tetrapods, including amphibians and reptiles and mammals. He looked at the fossil diversity. He looked at mutation rates, and he said about how long ago should tetrapods have diverged from other sarcopterygians, such as the then and now still existing animals like coelacanths and lungfish, but also things like Euthenopteron, which were also around at the time as sarcopterygians that were not transitioning to become more terrestrial. And he found that specific animal with the predicted morphology. It had the morphology of a more primitive sarcopterygian fish in its forelimb, except it had been modified to give it a bit of a hand and an elbow. And it also had a clear distinction between the shoulder girdle and the neck, which is a characteristic of tetrapods, which is absent in more primitive sarcopterygians. That seems like really good evidence, I'll be honest.
But my question now is, can you prove that they did, in fact, do that? Not simply by using predictions, just can you prove that they did grow it from something else?
Who did what?
That they grew it from another. That species 1 turned into species 2.
Well, in the fossil record, we generally can't 100% for sure say that one species that we know of gave rise to another one that we know of, even if they're closely related. So, for instance, some people will say that the two species of Triceratops horridus and Triceratops prorsus, likely one gave rise to the other because we have some intermediate fossils, and that seems likely, but we can't actually say for certain. It's possible that there was an isolated Triceratops population that we have never found fossils for that came in and displaced the other Triceratops population. That's a possibility. But the thing is that if evolution were true, we would expect to see certain fossils. And so I can't say exactly what the ancestor species to Tiktaalik was, nor can I say with any certainty that Tiktaalik gave rise to future species that we're aware of. But I don't see why that is necessary. The fact is that it should exist if evolution is true. Animals like this. Not all of them would then be the ancestor of modern animals. Most of them would end up extinct because that's what happens to most species over any period of time, or a long enough period of time, not any period. But I just don't see why we should expect to be able to identify specific ancestor and daughter populations in the fossil record, whether or not evolution is true.
Mm-hmm.
But if evolution isn't true, I wouldn't expect to see any transitional fossils. I could accommodate them, but they wouldn't be predicted.
Yeah, and if creation were true, those would not be transitional fossils.
They wouldn't. But one of the things is, I don't know of any predictions that creationism has made. So to me, it's not so much that it's wrong as it is it's not useful. Science ultimately can't really determine if something is ultimately true in some philosophical sense. But what it can do is say, this idea is useful because it makes useful predictions that we can use to make future finds or future technology or future hypotheses that can then later go on and make even more true predictions. Science is essentially in the prediction game. It's in two games, predictions and falsifications. Evolution has never been falsified, but it makes lots of predictions that have been verified. And that is what evidence for theory in science is. Failure to be falsified and evidence of accurate predictions. If that's not what evidence is in science, what is?
Well, evidence would be just looking at what you have and going off of it.
So there's no value to predictions in science?
Well, sorry, I'm
Oh.
losing this. Okay. Is everything okay?
Yeah, for a little bit you had some weird clicking going on, but I think you're back.
Yeah. So, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. I was saying that if failure to be falsified and verifiable predictions that are then actually verified isn't evidence in science, I feel like maybe we're just using the word science very differently. What do you think is evidence in science? Because it can't just be observations. Because observations are compatible with huge numbers of explanations on their own.
Well, yeah, but predictions do count in science. I was incorrect. If I said.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you there.
Predictions are technically science, but yeah, actually, they're very much. It's just it's saying, hey, there's a transition. No, there's a fossil here. We found it because we predicted that it would be here.
Right.
And then just saying that, hey, it's now a transitional fossil.
No, I get it.
Fossil.
Transitional fossil. Yep.
Because we predicted that it's here, that it would be here.
It's not transitional because of the prediction. It's transitional because it meets that morphological definition for a transitional fossil that you agreed to. It has this intermediate morphology between what evolution would consider to be a more basal form and a more derived form. It's in the middle, and so it represents the stages of the transition from the more basal form to the more derived form. Its presence at all is actually what the prediction is. So we predict, hey, if we want a transitional fossil, let's look here. And then we find a fossil that happens to be transitional. We can tell if it's transitional whether or not there was a prediction. So for instance, most of the animals in the history of the evolution of whales have been found, like Basilosaurus, Dorudon, Pakicetus, Ambulocetus. They weren't really predicted, but they were recognized as transitional, and it was a prediction of evolution that we would find such fossils somewhere, but the exact location was hard to pin down because, as ocean-going animals, it's hard to figure out where cetaceans might have come from, especially since they were genetically linked to artiodactyls. But I mean, artiodactyls are everywhere. So again, it's where do you look for the transitions? And the answer was, well, I don't know. So the only real prediction that was made was that such transitions would exist, but they were recognized as transitional because they meet that morphological definition. So.
Well, yeah. Speaking of whales, sorry, I might be going off topic here, but
no, hey, it's still a fossil record.
How many fossils were there found?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. Most fossil species are described off of a handful of specimens, from down to one all the way up to, in some cases, as many as a few. Like 4 or 5 is considered a pretty good record for any given species. There are some species that have exceptional numbers, but I don't know the numbers of specimens found for any particular fossil cetacean.
But like, how many transitional fossils are there?
You mean how many actual organisms that do we know of?
Yeah, like from doggy to whale.
Well, first, I'm going to point out that the mainstream idea behind cetacean evolution is that they were artiodactyls, and so there shouldn't be any donkeys anywhere in this because donkeys are parasodactyls. But so we have the earliest thing that we can identify as being related to whales more closely than it is to, say, hippos, which are the current extant sister group to cetaceans as hippos, is Pakicetus, which is a mostly terrestrial, about wolf-sized predator that seems to have spent a lot of time in the water. We can tell this from certain chemistry in the fossils, because aquatic life actually leads to a different bone chemistry, which can then lead to different chemistry in the fossils. Also, it does seem to have some minor adaptations for swimming. It has significant amounts of up and down flexibility that other artiodactyls don't have as much of. Artiodactyls tend to have pretty stiff spines compared to, say, carnivorans, whereas Pakicetus seem not to have had. But then we got Ambulocetus, which seems to have been even better adapted for swimming. It had particularly broad manus and pes that were probably webbed between the digits. Then we can get to things like Dorudon, which was very highly adapted for aquatic life. It had its nares were very high up on the skull, like a blowhole, not quite as high as we see in modern whales. It still had 4 limbs, but the hind limbs were very reduced. Then we get to Basilosaurus, which barely had hind limbs at all. It had pretty much a real blowhole, but it still had some heterodont dentition, and it still had some of those more primitive artiodactyl features. And then we can get into more advanced fossil odontocetes, most of which I don't know the names of off the top of my head because I'm not really a cetacean expert, so I don't know all of them. But I mean, that's at least 4 that we know of that illustrate this transition.
Yeah, so and yeah.
So I guess I can name 4 from memory, but there are others, is my answer to your question.
So let's assume 10. There's 10 transitional fossils
That we've found.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this would be a speeded up gradualism.
I don't understand the question.
Like, how do you think this would take place?
Well, so if we start with, say, Pakicetus, and we can even start a little bit more primitive than that, we'll have an animal that is an artiodactyl that is a predator on land, but it starts to find itself able to easily catch prey in the water, or somewhat easily. And maybe that also helps it avoid a predator or something like that. So it spends some time in the water. And so we actually have modern mammals that do things like this. So, for instance, otters spend a lot of time in the water, but they also spend a lot of time, beavers too. They're still very obviously adapted for terrestrial life, but they spend a lot of time in the water. And then this can continue, and we can get to something like a seal, which spends almost all of its time in the water, but it still comes on land sometimes. And that's where we get things like Ambulocetus. But then as we keep getting more and more time in the water, less and less time in the land, the hind limbs start to shrink as the tail takes over as the main propulsive mechanism. And then ultimately they can go inside the body wall entirely because now they're only presenting drag to the animal. The front limbs will stay as paddles because they help with stability and steering. We get the development of a cartilaginous, fleshy dorsal fin, which doesn't really have any underlying skeletal features, but still exists, similarly to the dorsal fin that you see in things like ichthyosaurs, or even some more advanced mosasaurs. And
I'm
so,
sorry. I'm gonna have to go soon. But
okay, let's go to questions then. If we'll give you one more response, and then we'll just take off with questions.
well, my response with the question would be, how can you prove by simply using bones? Like, do you have a DNA thing? But
I can't prove
anyway,
anything.
let's just.
I can't prove it. That's the answer to that. But Maya, do we have questions from the audience?
Yes.
So let's get as many for Unidentified Leviathan as we can at first, just because he's gonna have to get going soon.
I have like 2 minutes left, so like.
Oh,
please,
okay.
Quickly now.
Yeah. Do we have any for Unidentified Leviathan?
Not really.
Okay. Well, I won't answer too many questions just because I don't want to answer lots of questions without Unidentified Leviathan around to kind of counter it. But look, I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you being in my comments and my chats. I really like that. You ask interesting questions like you did with Landon Knoll. And so thanks for coming out and having your first debate. Keep working on that. Keep
Yeah.
studying. Maybe if you do another one, have an outline prepared for an opening.
Okay.
But
I gotta
thank
go.
you very much. All right, thank you, Unidentified Leviathan. I'm going to take away his picture so that way it looks like he's not even here. Bam.
Bye.
And then
Okay, sorry about that. I didn't know that he had a time cap at 7. Well, 7 my time. You guys still had 6 minutes. Yeah, you guys still had 6 minutes in this round.
Just give me a second.
Okay.
So.
I guess I'll just mute him because he's off. There we go. Okay. Yeah. So, are there any questions in the chat for me?
Yes, there are. So, emotionally stunted emoticon says at Dapper Dino they have no explanation for why we never find any marine tetrapods before the origin of tetrapods in the Denovian. Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty interesting because there's no particularly good reason why, say, fossils of ichthyosaurs or dolphins shouldn't be in the same strata as the earliest shark fossils. They live in essentially the same places. They eat about the same food. They actually are more dense than sharks because sharks don't have bony skeletons. So, if anything, according to the hydrological sorting theory, it should be easy to find these things, but we don't.
Okay. Nestled Nestled 20 says at Dapper Dino. My question I would ask if you can say that mixtures like, is it Tiktaalik?
Yeah.
Can exist because God created a wide variety of creatures and thus some might look like transitional species.
I mean, so putting on my sort of creationist hat, because I was a creationist for a fair bit of time earlier in my life. Basically, the only thing I see is just kind of a post hoc, like, oh, God just made them that way. Which, yeah, okay, that's you can't really counter that by saying no, God couldn't have created a fossil and or species. Well, actually, it wouldn't have been a fossil species when he created it, but he couldn't have created something like Tiktaalik because by definition God can do whatever he wants. So, but the question then comes in, well, there's no reason to think that he would have in a posteriori sense, whereas evolution gives us that ability to use posteriori predictions to say, I expect this, even though I haven't seen it. So, what else we got?
Nestle 20 again says, Dapper Dino better mention real predictions of theories that he would accept, like germ theory and relativity.
Yeah, that probably would have helped. But look, Unidentified Leviathan came on, and this is his first debate, and he's a pretty young guy, and so there's a lot of the debate, I enjoyed the discussion. I think he was expecting me to go in a very different direction than I actually went. So I think we both missed out on some of the points we could have made.
Mm-hmm. And then Nestle is just now clarifying. That's the first half of my question. Second half, however, why don't we find things that would go against phylogeny, such as Pegasus or Manticore?
Well, so essentially it comes down to the same thing, right? God can create or not create anything. So God doesn't have to make hybrid creatures. But one of the things is that there's no particular reason not to. So we've seen intelligently designed animals in terms of creatures that humans have made up, because humans are intelligent to some extent at least, right? And humans have made up these creatures, but they are almost always chimerical. They're leopards with a human face, or a horse with bird wings, or the hind feet of a goat and the tail of a snake and the face of a chicken or something, right? And so it doesn't seem like there's a particularly good reason why, if animals were specially created, there wouldn't be these admixtures. So, for instance, well, why aren't there any, Antarctic amphibians? God could just give them, nice fur, nice warm fur, and speed up their metabolism a little bit, and then frogs would do just fine. Well, okay, that's true, he could, but obviously he didn't. And so evolution couldn't, because there wasn't really much to work with, and frogs were doing just fine in the tropics. So it's one of those things where, like, there's no particular reason. And another thing is, biogeography is also an interesting topic that's related to this. I know this is going off from the question, but I feel like that's probably okay, because I think we're caught up on questions, aren't we?
There's a couple more.
Okay. But I'll just go over that really quickly. So biogeography says things like, why aren't there horses in, say, North America or South America? They would do just fine. And by this I mean we're excluding the introduced horses that came later. Or why don't oceanic islands have the same species as landmasses nearby? Why do they have different species? And why are they almost always missing significant segments of biodiversity? For instance, oceanic islands almost always have an extreme scarcity of endemic mammals, but they almost always have lots of birds. And interestingly, islands, the only endemic mammals they tend to have are bats, the kinds of things that could get to an island. Whereas if things were specially created in place on an island, you wouldn't expect to have this weird biogeography kind of thing. But what else we got?
Okay. Another one from Nestle 20. It's also important to note that scientists didn't make this discovery of.
Hello? Maya? Did this seriously just happen again? All right, I'll send Maya another invite somehow. I don't know why Zoom is doing this to me. It's never done this to me before. Has anyone else ever had problems with Zoom like this? I don't know what's going on. It's probably my fault. And yeah, I do know that horses did originate in North America, but it still presents a sort of a weird biogeography question. So I'm gonna copy this, send it back here. I'd actually never heard that ant thing. That was an interesting one to me. Give me a second, guys. Sorry, I'm trying to send an invitation all in VR, and it's weird and hard. So, we're probably going to end it pretty soon, though, even with Maya coming back. So, yeah. Not sure how that happened. But, let's see. There's channel news. There's a little bit. So, yeah, seriously, I'm under attack. I really do feel like it. So let's see.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I don't think I touched anything, but I'm not positive.
I don't either. I clearly didn't.
I don't know. Maybe Zoom is just being weird. Maybe I'll try something else for my next live stream. Let's see. Nestle 20 said, also in Hebrew, apples are masculine and figs are feminine. I believe you. I don't actually know, but yeah. So generally speaking, about half of nouns in Hebrew and Arabic are feminine, and about the other half are masculine. So there's really, and neither language has an easy ability to simply not use gendered pronouns in the language. Like if you're going to refer to ants in the plural, you have to use and use a pronoun. You have to use the feminine pronoun, or you're wrong. So it's not what I would consider to be a very good argument. I'll just say that. Cedric says, my avatar searching around for a fix is almost understanding up for $50 a month. Hey man, that's one of the tiers on my Patreon, which is actually I'm gonna be wrapping this up and plugging some stuff. So my Patreon is live. It's on my channel page. It's just patreon.com/the_dapper_diner. I'm sorry, dinosaur. I can't talk. Dinosaur is all fully spelled out, so it's the Dapper Dinosaur with underscores. Yeah, if you really like my content, please feel free to go head over there. We have tiers from $1 all the way to $100. You get successively better rewards all the way through. It starts out with Discord rewards and thanks on the channel, but eventually you can even get things like a 3D model of my Ceratosaurus that I use for the Dapper Dinosaur that I made, video requests, things like that. So how does the environment and changes in the environment over time lead to changes in biological systems? Well, basically, different systems are better adapted for different environments. I mean, that's so. For instance, one of the reasons that it seems like diapsids and especially archosaurs started to take over after the or during the Triassic, because the Permian extinction happens, and what we come back to is a world where over 90% of all land vertebrates are dicynodonts, which is a kind of synapsid. It's really weird. But the Triassic was a period full of drying and heating, and diapsids have very low water waste levels. They don't sweat. They eliminate the same chemicals that mammals eliminate through urine in a different process, which takes up far less water. And so diapsids seem to have been kind of pre-adapted to survive in this newly sort of deserty conditions. And so they thrived and outcompeted most synapsids, which is why by the end of it, basically, other than mammaliforms, we're basically out of synapsids in terms of biodiversity. And then because they became so big and successful, big animals tend to die off. And so when there was an extreme environmental disruption with the asteroid, well, most of the really big stuff died off, and mammals were really great at being the small, burrowing insectivores and herbivores and stuff. And yeah, it's like, thanks for mentioning the way they urinate. Hey man, always happy to talk about urination in science class. Always good. Yeah. But I think that is going to be it for now. Thank you very much for stopping by. Like I said, please head over if you like this video a lot to the Patreon. Sorry about that, Unidentified Leviathan. I have a tendency to throw debate opponents off. It's only a little intentional, if I'm being honest. It's a little intentional. I usually try to go in directions that people aren't going to expect. I feel like it's tactically advantageous. But thank you for coming on. And by the way, this is something that I have as kind of a standing thing. If you watch my videos and you disagree with me, come on, let's have a talk about it. And I'll give you a cool avatar. The Science of Golden Child. All right, we're going to keep this PG-13 and get out of here, guys. Thank you so much. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur, and here's my intro again because it's cool.
So let's say you found the skeleton. How would you tell people that besides you personally? How would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.